Montana Territory, September 1878. The sky was the color of cooling ash when the girl was sold. Sierra Whitlow stood still as stone beside the wagon, dust clinging to her hem and the wind pulling strands of her dark hair across her face. Her father, Grant Whitlow, reeked of whiskey and horse sweat. He was loud, louder than the wind, louder than the murmurs of the other traders lingering around the small post just east of the Yellowstone River. "She's strong, knows how to break a mule and skin a pheasant," Grant barked, resting a hand on Sierra's shoulder like she was a bundle of pelts. "You won't find better. $20 or I take her to Fort Benton." Sierra didn't flinch. Her lips were pressed tight, eyes fixed on the cracked boards of the trading post wall. She had known this day would come ever since her mother died and her father's debts started running faster than his horses. At 17, she had escaped once ran off for 2 days before he dragged her back and locked her in a feed shed until she could no longer stand. That was 2 years ago. She was 19 now, and he had finally run out of things to trade. A few men grunted disinterestedly. One asked if she could cook. "She can," Grant said quickly. Raised by a Crow woman, knew her way around a fire before she learned her letters. The men weren't interested in food. Sierra's hands curled into fists behind her back. Her breath came slow, steady. She would not cry, not now, not in front of these men. Then a voice, calm and quiet, cut through the noise. "I will take her." The crowd shifted. A tall man stepped forward from beside a roan gelding. He looked no older than 30, sun-browned, with a strong jaw and a steady gaze. His shirt was plain but clean, sleeves rolled to the elbow. A rifle was strapped to his saddle, but his hands were empty. "I did not hear you offer silver," Grant said, squinting. "I did not," the man replied. Grant laughed. "Then get the hell out of here. This is not a sermon." The man stepped closer. "My name is Lawson Vance. I have land north of here near the Mussel Shell. I do not deal in people like cattle, but I see what you are doing and I will not walk away." "You want her," Grant sneered. "Then pay." Lawson met Sierra's eyes for the first time. "I offer shelter, safety, my word, and if she agrees, a place where no one will ever touch her without her say." Sierra's breath caught. She had not expected kindness. Not here. Grant rolled his eyes. "The hell she needs is discipline." Lawson's voice turned to steel. "You have had your chance to give her that. She will answer for herself now." Grant opened his mouth to argue, but Sierra stepped forward, chin high. "I will go with him," Grant sputtered. "You ungrateful, she is not yours anymore," Lawson said, stepping between them. "You sold that right the minute you tried to trade her for coin." There was a moment, a tense, breathless pause before Grant spat on the ground and turned away. "She will come crying back in a week." "You wait." "I will not," Sierra said. Lawson offered his hand without saying a word. Sierra hesitated. Then she took it. They rode away as the sun dipped behind the pines. Sierra tucked behind him on the saddle, hands gripping the edge of his coat. She did not speak, and he did not force her to. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of choices. By the time they reached the edge of his claim, dusk had settled deep. His cabin stood near a bend in the creek, smoke curling from the chimney. A garden lay to one side, and a small corral held 2 lean horses and a milk cow. Everything about the place felt peaceful, honest. "You can have the room," Lawson said, dismounting. "I built the cabin last spring. Roof holds in the snow, stove works fine. I'll sleep in the barn." Sierra looked at him, unsure. "Why are you doing this?" He met her gaze. "Because I know what it is to be alone. And I know what it means when someone steps in and says, 'Not this time.' No one said that for my mother. I will say it for you." Her eyes burned, but she would not cry. That night she slept under a roof not made of fear. By the end of the week, Sierra had washed every dish in the house, patched 2 shirts, and cleared the weeds from the garden. Lawson never asked her to. He rose before dawn, worked the fields, repaired the fence, and always left an extra blanket folded by her door. He never touched her. Never asked for anything. But he watched her, not with hunger but with quiet attention. Like she mattered. One morning she brought him coffee in a tin cup, hands warm from the stove. He looked up from the fence post he was hammering and smiled, a real one this time. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. They stood there, sun on their faces, wind rustling the dry grass. She looked toward the horizon. "What happens now?" Lawson wiped his hands on a rag. "You stay as long as you like. If you want to leave, I will take you wherever you want. If you want to build something here, I think we could." Sierra stared at him. "You would build with me?" "Yes," he said, "but only if you want it." She did not answer right away. But that night, she cooked stew and set 2 bowls at the table. She waited until he sat before serving herself. Then she smiled. "I think I want to stay." The first frost came quiet in early October, tracing the window panes in delicate white lace before dawn. Sierra rose before the sun, tugged her shawl close, and stepped outside to gather kindling. The earth felt different beneath her feet, firmer, as if the land itself had accepted her presence. She moved without hesitation now, knowing which boards creaked on the porch, which way the latch turned on the barn door without catching. Inside, Lawson was bent over a saddle cinch, oiling the leather with methodical care. He glanced up when she entered but didn't speak right away. The silence stretched, not awkward but deliberate. "You ever rode the roan?" he asked, eyes still on his work. "Not yet. She's sure-footed, not fast, but she'll carry you through snow like a mule, and she don't spook easy." Sierra leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You offering me a ride?" "I'm saying she's yours if you want her," her brow lifted. "Why would you give me a horse?" Lawson looked up then, the edge of his mouth tugging just a little. "Because it's a long walk to anywhere, and I'd rather you stay because you mean to, not because you can't leave." She studied him. "You always so particular about freedom," he set the oilcloth aside. "Only since I learned how heavy it is to live without it." She said nothing as the wind moved through the open door, carrying the scent of pine and far smoke. Then she stepped forward and laid her hand on the saddle's horn. "She needs a name," she said. Lawson nodded. "That she does." By mid-morning, they were riding side by side through a hollow where the chokecherry bushes had begun to turn. Sierra rode with her spine straight, hands sure on the reins. The roan, now called Larkspur, responded to her like they'd belonged to each other all along. They rode until the sun warmed the backs of their coats. At a rise overlooking the valley, Lawson drew up and dismounted, tying his mare to a sapling. Sierra followed, boots crunching dry grass. Below them, the creek curled silver between yellowing cottonwoods, and beyond that, the hills rolled soft and open clear to the breaks. "This is yours?" she asked. He nodded. "Filed the claim 3 years ago, cleared the trees myself. Hauled the first boards from a sawyer out of Judith Basin. You did all that alone, figured I'd rather be tired than beholden." She picked up a flat stone and turned it over in her palm. "There's something in that." Lawson crouched near a patch of wild onion, plucking one and brushing the dirt from its roots. "You ever think of planting something for yourself?" "I don't know what I'd grow." "Well," he said, offering the bulb to her, "these will winter well. Come spring, you could try beans, maybe squash. Soil's good here, just needs tending." She tucked the onion into her pocket. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough." Then, after a breath, "Maybe I could." They walked back as the sun dipped, their shadows long across the field. At the cabin, Sierra took down the dried corn she'd hung days earlier and ground it fine while Lawson chopped wood at the edge of the clearing. The rhythm of their tasks wove together, quiet and companionable. After supper, she lingered at the hearth, watching the fire pop against the stone. Lawson sat across from her, sharpening a blade with slow, even strokes. "Why'd you really come to the post that day?" she asked. His hand paused. "Was picking up salt and canvas. Heard your father before I saw him. Couldn't walk away." "You didn't know me." "No," he said, setting the knife aside, "but I knew what it looked like to see someone standing like they'd already been left behind." She swallowed, lifting her eyes. "He used to have a gentler voice." "When I was small." Lawson didn't speak, but his stillness held space for her words. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, he'd remember how to care, but it's like he forgot I was his." Lawson leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You're more than what he failed to see. The fire cracked. She stared into it. You want to keep sleeping in the barn? She asked. He blinked. I don't mind it. I didn't ask if you minded. Her voice was steady. I asked if you wanted to. Lawson met her gaze, and for the first time there was something unguarded in it. Not desire, not yet, but the beginning of trust deepening into something stronger. I'd like to be near, he said quietly, if you'd have me there. She stood and crossed to him, her steps slow, deliberate. Then she reached for his hand, not a gesture of claiming, but of offering. I'd have you there. Lawson's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the scent of snow. But inside, the fire burned steady, and the space between them no longer held distance, only promise. By late October, the light changed. It turned thinner, almost blue at the edges, and the days folded in on themselves quicker than either of them liked. The cabin stayed warm with the stove lit, but the wind howled at night now, sharp and restless, like it was searching for cracks. Sierra kept her hands busy carding wool Lawson had traded for, stitching a lining into her shawl, scraping the last of the summer wax from candle molds. Work filled the space between heartbeats, but it wasn't the work that rooted her here. It was the way Lawson glanced toward her when he passed through the room, like she was part of the place now, not something temporary or fragile. One evening, she sat on the step, whittling curls from a piece of pine. Lawson approached from the barn, the woodpile balanced across one shoulder. He set it down beside her and brushed his palms against his trousers. I thought we might go into town next week, he said. She tilted her head. What for? Supplies. Maybe find a tin of tea if there's any left. You could pick out what you like. Sierra scraped another ribbon from the pine. I've never chosen something just for liking it. You could start. She glanced up. And if I pick something foolish, he crouched beside her, his voice quieter than the wind, then we'll both be foolish for it. She looked at the half-carved length in her hand and set it aside. I'd like to go, she said. They rose before dawn the morning they rode out, bundled against the cold, saddlebags light but ready. The town of Lavina sat low and dusty between two ridges, with no more than a dozen buildings strung along the main road. A bell above the church clanged the hour as they tied their horses outside the mercantile. Inside, the air smelled of flour and lamp oil. A woman behind the counter glanced up, then gave Sierra a long look, curious, not cruel. Sierra stepped past her, fingers trailing along bolts of homespun and small tins of buttons. She paused at a shelf lined with jars, pickled beets, blackberry preserves, something yellow and soft she didn't recognize. Lawson stood near the front, watching her with patience tucked behind his stillness. You ever had quince jam? She asked. Can't say I have. She picked up the jar with both hands. Then we'll try it. They left with more than they'd planned: salt, flour, a jar of pickles, and a stack of old newspapers wrapped around a pair of knitting needles. Sierra carried the parcel herself, balancing it carefully across the saddle as they rode. On the way back, she turned toward him, the wind lifting her hair behind her. You always live so far from people. I came north for quiet. You found it. Lawson glanced toward the horizon. Some days I think I might have been looking for something else. I just didn't know the shape of it. Sierra looked down at her hands, raw from cold and rope, and then ahead to where the creek crossed their trail. And now, I think maybe I know. That night, she unwrapped the parcel and set the jar of quince jam on the table. She reached for 2 spoons and passed one to Lawson. He took it without a word. They tasted it together, sweet and strange and unlike anything either had known. Sierra licked the spoon and leaned back in her chair. I think I'll mend that second quilt tomorrow. You expecting company? I'm expecting frost, she said. But company wouldn't be so bad. Lawson leaned forward, elbows on the table. What kind would you want? She turned the spoon in her fingers. The kind that comes back after going out for firewood. He didn't answer right away. But when he stood, he reached for the second blanket from the peg by the door and handed it to her. For the bed, he said. If you want me there, she rose slowly, folding the wool across one arm. I want you there. The wind battered the walls that night, but neither of them heard it. They lay beneath the quilt she'd stitched and the one she hadn't yet, warmth drawn between them not from the stove, but from the closeness of two people who had chosen deliberately, tenderly to belong. By morning, the creek had frozen at the edges. The horses stamped frost from their hooves. Sierra stepped outside with a pail in her hand and a smile she didn't try to hide. Lawson watched her from the doorway, the sky behind him pale and wide, and he said nothing, but he didn't need to. Everything between them now was understood. The first snow came just after dusk, soft and slow, drifting down like feathers shaken loose from the sky. Sierra stood barefoot on the plank floor, the warmth of the stove brushing her calves, and listened to the stillness outside. It wasn't silence exactly, but the hush that came with snow, how it blanketed the world, until even the wind seemed to tread more carefully. Lawson came in with his coat, dusted white, and set the lantern on the table. He shook the flakes from his shoulders and pulled his gloves off finger by finger. "Cow's holding well," he said. "She's tucked in tight, you can barely see the fence line." Sierra crossed to the hearth and added another split log. "We'll have to check the roof in the morning. Last storm like this, our place caved in near the stove pipe." Lawson rubbed his palms together. "That was your mother's cabin," she nodded once, "near the Little Bighorn. She built it with her own hands, birch logs packed with clay and straw, held strong until the spring rains." He watched her a moment, then stepped closer. "You think of her often." "Every day," she said. She was quiet, but not soft. She used to say this land didn't care who you were, only how long you could hold on. He pulled a chair near the fire and sat, stretching his legs out and resting his hands over his knees. "Sounds like someone who knew the weight of things." She did. Sierra lowered herself beside him. "When she died, I didn't cry, not then. I just waited for someone to tell me what came next." Lawson didn't speak, but his presence held steady beside her, not filling the space, just sharing it. "I used to dream of running," she said. "But now I wake up and I want to stay." He turned his head, his voice low. "Because of the land." "Because of you," she said, not looking away. The lantern flickered. Outside, the snow thickened, burying every trail behind them. After a while, Lawson stood and took down the small wooden box from the shelf near the stove. He opened it, revealing a folded scrap of blue calico, a sliver of beeswax, and a chain with a plain brass key. "I meant to show you this sooner," he said. "It's the deed. To the land, the cabin, everything I've put into it." Sierra touched the edge of the paper. "Why show me?" "Because I want you to have your name on it, too." She blinked slowly, her voice quiet. "That's no small thing." He reached for her hand. "Neither are you." She let him hold it, their fingers fitting together without effort. "We'll need more seed come spring." "I'll ride to Judith in March," he said. "Bring back barley and cabbage, whatever you choose. And chickens. I want hens that'll give us brown eggs." He smiled, but not broadly, just enough that his eyes softened. "Then we'll build a proper coop." Sierra leaned into his side, her head resting just below his shoulder. "You never ask what I want beyond chores or fences." "I figure you'll tell me in time." She looked up at him. "I want to be your wife." Lawson's lips parted, but no words came at first. Then, slowly, "Only if it's for both our sakes. Not because the world expects it." "I'm not asking the world," she said. "I'm asking you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple, made of iron and polished smooth. "I forged this before the first frost. Wasn't sure when to offer it." Sierra took it from his palm and slid it on her finger. "It fits." "It should," he said. "It's shaped for you." That night they lay in the same bed with the storm thick around them, the roof holding fast above their heads. No words passed between them, only the steady sound of breath, the weight of a promise already made. By morning, the world outside had disappeared beneath white. But inside, the hearth burned clean, and between them, nothing was uncertain. The snow held through December, thick against the eaves and waist deep in the low spots between the trees. Lawson built a sled from fir planks and iron runners, and Sierra lined it with wool sacks so they could haul chopped wood more easily from where the trees stood dense near the ridge. They worked in tandem, wordless most days, their rhythm so well matched it no longer needed instruction. When she chopped kindling, he stacked it. When he broke ice from the trough, she salted the path back to the barn. The quiet between them was no longer distance, it was knowing. One morning, the clouds lifted, revealing a pale blue sky so wide it turned the snow gold near the edges. Sierra stood outside the shed, brushing sawdust from her sleeves, when Lawson stepped from the barn holding a wooden crate. "I fixed the press," he said. "One in the shed was split along the baseboard, but I braced it with hickory. Thought we could try cider come spring." She stepped closer, eyeing the joinery. "You carved that slat yourself, every bit." She ran her fingers across the edge, then looked up. "You ever think of building more than what we need?" "How do you mean?" Sierra's voice was quiet. "I mean something lasting, a schoolhouse, or a place for others to gather, not just pass through or trade." He studied her. "You want to bring folks in. I want to give something back. This land gave me you. It gave me room to become someone else. I want to give that to someone." Lawson set the crate down and leaned his weight into the fence behind them. "There's a ridge above the eastern creek bank, flat enough to frame a foundation. I could start clearing it after thaw." She nodded once. "We'd need books and paper, chalk maybe. I can send for those when I ride out for feed." Sierra looked toward the tree line. "I want to teach girls what I didn't know about keeping bees, about reading maps, about how to grow things that last." Lawson's jaw worked quietly as he thought. "Then we'll build it. No use in only surviving if you're not shaping something better." That night she pulled the ledger from beneath the bed, the one her mother had kept, full of pressed leaves and seed notes. She opened it across the table and dipped her pen in ink. "This page," she said, "is for what comes next." He watched her write, her brow furrowed in focus, and then reached for his own pen. "Let me copy the supply list. We'll need to get the nails before the roads turn to mud." By late winter, they had the plans laid, beams marked, lumber promised by a neighbor who milled pine near the Judith crossing. Word spread slow but steady, and by early March, 2 families from the valley stopped by on their way west, asking if the rumors were true. Sierra met them with a calm she hadn't known she had. "We're building a place to learn. You're welcome to return when the walls are standing." One of the women, her shawl patched and hands rough as bark, laid a book down on the table. "It's a hymn collection. Pages are thin, but the words hold." Sierra accepted it with both hands. "It'll be the first on the shelf." The thaw came swift, carving rivulets through the snowbanks and waking the green beneath. Blossoms nudged their way up from the softened earth, and the creek, freed from its ice, sang again. Lawson and Sierra wed beneath the cottonwoods by the water. There was no preacher, only the land and the sky and the truth in their joined hands. She wore a dress she'd sewn from unbleached muslin, and he wore the same shirt he'd worn the first day they met, the cuffs freshly mended. They spoke their vows quiet and simple. "I'll rise with you," she said, "and I'll rest with you, no matter what the land gives or takes." His voice was steady. "You are my place to return. My home in every season." They kissed with the creek whispering behind them, and when they stepped back from each other, it was not as 2 people joined for survival, but as 2 who had chosen love, not sudden, not easy, but built plank by plank, day by day. The schoolhouse rose slow through the summer. Sierra painted the door a deep red with leftover barn stain, and Lawson carved their names beneath the lintel beam, small and discreet. By the time the leaves began to turn, 4 children sat at the benches Sierra had shaped with her own hands, learning to trace letters and measure seed rows. Evenings were different then. More laughter, more talk. Lawson would sit with a mug of cider he'd pressed himself, and Sierra would mend hems by lamplight, the children's voices still echoing in her ears. They planted an orchard come fall, 3 apple trees and a pear sapling. Sierra placed her hand over her belly as they dug the last hole, her gaze steady on the horizon. Lawson looked up from the shovel, breath catching. "You're sure?" she nodded, tears warming the corners of her eyes. "I'm sure." He dropped the spade and crossed to her, pressing his palm to hers. "Then we'll raise more than walls, we'll raise a life." Years passed, but the cabin never sagged and the creek never dried. The schoolhouse stood through every season, its windows lit even in the darkest months. Children came and children stayed. Sierra taught them how to read the shape of the sky, how to listen to the wind before the storm, how to hold a tool with purpose. Lawson built a second sled, this one smaller, just right for a child to ride in. He pulled it behind him one morning as the snow fell thick again, a little boy bundled tight in wool, his eyes wide with wonder. Sierra watched from the porch, her hands resting over her middle once more, the next child growing strong within her. Lawson looked up, snow in his hair, and called out, "He wants to go faster," she laughed, voice bright in the cold air. "Then run, Mr. Vance. He'll be chasing you before spring." And he did run, pulling the sled across the white field, the boy's laughter trailing behind him like a song. Inside the house, the fire burned steady. The walls were lined with books and pressed flowers. On the shelf above the hearth sat a jar of quince jam, unopened, waiting for the next day it was needed. Everything they built held. Everything they loved remained. And in that place between wood smoke and snowlight, they were never alone again.